Folks, we've got a big story brewing that speaks volumes about the unfair game being played on the world stage, and it's coming straight from the BRICS countries and other nations of the global south. They're tired, really tired, of the Western heavyweights holding all the cards at the United Nations. Now, I tell ya, they're not just sitting back, they're calling for a major shakeup. At the recent BRICS summit, these leaders didn't mince words. They want a massive overhaul of the UN, especially that high and mighty Security Council, where a few countries get to veto anything they don't like. Let me put it in plain language. The current setup doesn't cut it anymore. It's like a club where the same old members keep deciding what's best for everyone else, without really listening. And the double standards? Oh, they're as clear as day. Take human rights, for instance. Countries like China and Russia get the third degree, while the West often turns a blind eye to its own backyard mess. Now, why is that fair? It's not just about criticism, it's about fairness across the board. And let's talk about those refugees. When folks from Ukraine needed help, European countries opened their arms wide. But what about the people fleeing from Syria, Afghanistan, or Somalia? They faced a much colder welcome. Doesn't sound too fair to me. And don't get me started on the Middle East. Hamas throws a punch, and it's headline news. But when Israel hits back hard, sometimes too hard, it's like the world just whispers about it. In this video, we're diving deep into these proposed changes at the UN, trying to figure out why the folks down south want to turn the tables and what it means for everyone else, especially us here in the US. We've got to ask ourselves, are we part of the problem, or are we going to be part of the solution? Let's get to the bottom of this and see where America stands in a world that might be looking to rewrite the rules. You know, it's high time we talk about how some big watchdogs like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are finally pointing out the glaring imbalances at play. These BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they're shouting from the rooftops that the big Western powers have been playing gatekeeper at all the top tables like the United Nations, the World Bank, and the IMF. And let's be honest, they've got a point. The world has changed a lot since the 1940s, but these institutions, not so much. They're stuck in a post-World War II mindset that just doesn't cut it anymore. Now, I've got to ask for a quick favor. If you're finding this discussion enlightening, smash that like button. Your likes and comments not only mean the world to us, they also help more people get informed. And if you haven't already, consider watching the whole video to support our channel. We really value your engagement, and it helps us keep bringing you these deep dives into what's happening around the world. Thank you for being part of our community. Take a look at the IMF and the World Bank, where the top dogs have always been from the US and Europe. What does that tell you? It's clear as day that the West continues to clutch the reins of global financial power, making all the rules that the rest of the world has to play by. And let me tell you, the rules of the game are anything but fair. These institutions, they love to attach strings to their money, strings that pull countries towards policies that favor the West, not the folks actually taking the loans. It's like saying, here's some help, but only if you play by my rules, which often involve tightening belts, cutting public spending, even if it means folks suffer without basic healthcare or education. That's not help, that's hegemony. And now, with all the geopolitical chess games, what with Russia and China expanding their clout, the West is pushing back hard with sanctions and political maneuvers aimed squarely at keeping these rising powers in check. These sanctions aren't just about human rights. They're a tool to maintain Western dominance, plain and simple. China's catching heat over Xinjiang and Hong Kong, and the South China Sea has become a flashpoint, with the US and Europe piling on the pressure. Even the military alliances are part of this big game. Look at the Quad and AUKUS. These aren't just friendly get-togethers, they're strategic moves to box in countries like China and Russia, keeping them from changing the status quo. All right, let's break it down, because this is crucial for understanding the world we're living in today. These BRICS nations, they're not just sitting quietly on the sidelines anymore. They're calling foul on the way the big leagues like the IMF are run. You see, even though China has become an economic powerhouse, second only to the US, with a GDP soaring over $14 trillion. Its influence in the IMF is like a drop in the bucket compared to its economic weight. And it's not just China feeling the squeeze. All the BRICS countries are saying, hey, we matter too. Now, let's talk about the big green elephant in the room, climate change. The West is all about cutting emissions, which is great, but they often forget to pass the hat when it comes to helping out the nations that are still trying to get on their feet. These developing countries are expected to jump on the green bandwagon without the same help that the developed world had getting to where they are today. It's like telling someone to run a race but not giving them shoes. Then came COVID-19, and boy, did it rip the mask off some ugly truths about global governance. While wealthy nations were hoarding vaccines, countries in the global south were left waiting for scraps. This pandemic showed us all that when push comes to shove, it's every nation for itself, unless we rewrite the rules of the game to be fairer for everyone. And don't get me started on trade. The West has all these agricultural subsidies that make it tough for the little guy to compete. It's like playing a rigged game where the house always wins. Now let's step back to 1945 when the UN was set up. It was a different world back then. The UN was meant to be this big, happy family of nations working together for peace. Fast forward to today, and it's clear that the Security Council, with its permanent members who can veto anything they don't like, is a relic of a bygone era. It's time to ask ourselves, are these the rules we still want to play by? The Cold War era was a time of high drama at the United Nations, almost like a theater stage set for the showdown between the US-led Western Bloc and the Soviet-led Eastern Bloc. Despite the ideological tug-of-war, the UN was instrumental in spearheading peacekeeping missions and supporting the wave of decolonization that swept through Africa and Asia. It's fascinating to think about the first UN peacekeeping mission in 1948 in the Middle East and the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that same year, a real milestone in global governance. As we moved past the Cold War by the 1990s, the UN faced a new world order with both fresh challenges and opportunities. The organization ramped up its peacekeeping efforts, dealing with conflicts in places like the Balkans, Rwanda, and Somalia, although not without its missteps, notably the tragic failure in Rwanda. This period also marked a significant pivot towards sustainable development, highlighted by the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio, which led to critical initiatives like the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity. Entering the 21st century, the UN adopted the Millennium Development Goals, and later, the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, ambitious blueprints aimed at tackling poverty, ensuring education and health, and environmental sustainability by 2030. These efforts underscore the ongoing need for a dynamic and responsive UN, yet the call for reform has never been louder or clearer. Now, we're hearing serious talks about potentially overhauling the UN or even replacing it to better reflect today's geopolitical realities. Proposals are on the table to expand the Security Council's permanent members to include pivotal nations like India, Brazil, and South Africa. There's also a strong push to empower regional organizations like the African Union, ASEAN, and the European Union, which could handle local issues more adeptly while still aligning with global objectives. A particularly intriguing idea is the proposal for a new global governance structure called the Democratic Nations, DN, which would feature a bicameral legislative system. This concept is designed to address the democratic deficits in current structures by including one chamber that represents governments and another made up of elected representatives directly accountable to the global populace. This could fundamentally change how global decisions are made, making them more democratic and reflective of the global citizenry's will. The notion of a World Parliamentary Assembly, WPA, is also gaining traction, especially with entities like the European Parliament advocating for it as a way to increase democratic involvement in global decision-making. This assembly could start as an advisory body to the UN General Assembly, with the potential to evolve into a legislative power. However, these reforms won't be easy. they face substantial hurdles, including the need for widespread agreement among member states and overcoming resistance from powerful countries that currently enjoy disproportionate influence, particularly those with veto power. But the momentum for change is building, bolstered by public support for more representative and direct governance mechanisms. As we delve into these complex issues, we must consider the delicate balance between maintaining global peace and adapting to the new realities of the 21st century. It's a pivotal moment for international cooperation, and the decisions we make now will shape the future of global governance. Are we ready to rethink the old ways and embrace a more inclusive and democratic approach? Let's explore these possibilities together. Thank you for watching. We sincerely appreciate you joining us today. If our content resonated with you or sparked inspiration, please consider expressing your support by liking it and subscribing to stay connected with our community.